Hello. Hello, Elly. How are you?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. But we already knew that, didn't we? And hello, everyone. And I hope you're having a great Thursday. And we will answer your questions today after, or just show you random stuff, after we do some housekeeping. So allow me to housekeep. Is that accurate? Allow me to housekeep.
Yeah, keeping of the house.
Keeping of the house. Okay, the house of Arthur Trainer. So where's my screen? I'm going to add it to the stage over here. And of course, on our Maxons, on the Maxon events page, you will see all the events, shows, and what's going on, what's happening, dates, regions. You can search. So it's your hub to find out where all our shows are. Talking about shows, the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel that hosts all these shows after they've been streamed live. And we're streaming today on the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel and the Maxon YouTube channel. But if you want to watch this recorded, make sure you go to the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel. And after a day, we get all the videos with timestamps and reply to your comments as much as we can. Timestamps courtesy of Dr. Sassy. And of course, don't miss the fantastic content we have on the ZBrush YouTube channel. And if you want to become certified for Cinema 4D, a certified pro user, go to the Maxon certifications page. And amongst other things, over here in this link that says certification topics, you'll find a list of topics that will, even if you don't want to become certified, it will guide you through your journey of learning Cinema 4D. Now, as a token of appreciation for your participation in these shows, for the month of February, it is February, isn't it? Yes, it's February still, 2024. Just, just keeping the record straight. You can go and grab your free t-shirt using the code for February, Redshift AOV, all caps, no spaces, and you only pay for postage and folding because there's not much packaging as far as I know. Go to this university channel and check out an amazing array of tutorials and shows and all that stuff. And of course, don't forget to visit theoldsuniversity.com, where we have over 10,000 tutorials that span back maybe 15 years or even more, where you'll find tutorials that the interface has changed, of course, things evolve, but still technical information that is invaluable if you want to learn Cinema 4D better. And with that said, I'm going to pass the baton of knowledge to my very good friend, Elly, because she has some very, very interesting stuff to show us. Elly.
Thanks. Cool. Yeah. So I've got a couple of questions that I'm going to answer. So I think it was like last week, I put a little bit of a Q&A on my Instagram and was like, hey, what do people want to know for this session today? And I've shared some of the questions with Thanasis, so he'll be going through some of those as well. But I thought I'd cover a couple of them now. So the first one, I'm actually going to throw the question up as well. We're going to start off really like nice and ease our way in. So this is the first question that I got, and it was how to fix materials from stretching over extruded surfaces. And just kind of bear in mind, this is my interpretation of all of these questions. So what I think this is relating to is sometimes when you apply a texture map, it can create like a stretch around some of the surfaces. So let's recreate it first. So I'm going to create a new material, and this is all going to be in Redshift today. I'm just going to throw that onto my extrude. Let's just kick that off. And let's find a texture map that we can hopefully stretch over here. So let's find like a dirt map in our media. And in my node editor, I'm just going to throw that in there. So let's go with that one. It doesn't matter which, it's just to represent what I think the question is relating to. And let's just put that inside of my base color. Perfect, cool. Yeah, so we have the effect I think the question is relating to. And so that is this stretching here. So we can see it's projecting nicely on the top face or the front cap, but on the sides, it's not really looking how we would want it to. And so if we use this as like a texture map or a roughness map or a bump map, we can see that we're not really going to get the right kind of projection. So there's a few different ways of dealing with this. Just like Cinema 4D, there are many ways to do the same kind of thing, depending on your knowledge and experience. So the first of which is if you click the tag, you actually get access to the material tag options. And in here, we have different projection types. So at the moment, it's set to UV mapping, but one that will work for this kind of thing is cubic. So if we change to a cubic projection, we can now see that we've fixed that projection and we're now getting none of that stretching going over here. But what's another way that we could do it? So let's put it back to UV mapping. So again, we could UV unwrap this, but we're not going to go into any of that today because this was from someone who stated that they were a beginner. So we're going to keep this on a slightly beginner level answer. But another way of fixing this is inside of the Redshift material. So inside of your node editor, we have a little node called TriPlanar. And so if we just double click, we can grab the TriPlanar node. And what I can do, I can actually hover it over this branch. So I'm going to click and drag it over the branch, and it's going to automatically connect everything for me. So if I just hover that over, what it does is it effectively takes this texture map, it ignores the UVs, and it tries to map it correctly and project it correctly over the surface of my object. And so you can see here, this is now working really great. The only kind of gotcha that I would say about this is if we then animate this, the TriPlanar will cause the texture to swim. So if cubic works, then perfect, that's fine for animation. But if you're working with a still, then TriPlanar is going to work well for you. So yeah, thank you for that question. And Thanasis, do you have any other tricks that you would do that don't include UV mapping?
No. Oh, well, I mean, it depends. You could use individual projections and mask them. You can make 3 or 4 different flat projections and project them from different sides. So more of a manual way to do something like the TriPlanar. And you can blend between these projections. You can isolate the polygons because even in generators, you can isolate the caps, the rounding, the shell, and so forth. So there are different ways of doing it. Sometimes for example, this one, the 5, you will see that if you do a flat projection of a noise or something like that on the shell, it's very difficult to isolate different parts of the shell. The shell is the part that extrudes between the 2 caps. So I always tell people, if you want a procedural, you have to stick with exactly what Elly said. But if you want something more fixed, go with UV mapping. It's not a bad technique, and it's good to know how to solve these problems. But if you want a procedural, then you have a bit fewer options.
Cool. Yeah, so that was that first question. And then the next one, let me just find the one, is this one here. So I spent a little bit of time earlier sort of playing around with this glistening effect. And I couldn't really get anything perfect, but I still want to talk about it. And I still want to talk about the fact that we tried to get there and we can get close. So let's just open this up. And I'm just going to really, really quickly build this scene. And so let's create something like an ocean. I'm just going to do this with a landscape. You can do this with a plane and displacement, but just for speed, I'm just going to go with this because I think it looks quite nice having this landscape. And let's just increase our segments here and just reduce that scale and that size, and maybe something like 3.3. There we go. So I agree, it doesn't look massively like an ocean, but the focus is on trying to create that glistening effect, and having those sharp little ridge edges like we do in the ocean is going to help the light to bounce off of our material. And that's what I use for this effect. Cool. So let's just kick that off. And then let's create the sun and sky rig. And so again, to me, in the real world, the glistening on top of the surface of the ocean is caused by, of course, the reflection of the water, but it's the sun or the light that's hitting that creates that. So I'm going to try and recreate that kind of effect. So let's just go into our coordinates a little bit. And I already set this up earlier, so I have a bit of an idea of the direction in which I want my sun to face. So something a little bit like this, and then let's go maybe like 50. So we've got the sun coming from the top of my screen in, and we can already see we're creating some nice shadows inside of here. And then maybe we can also just, we don't need to worry about any of those, that intensity. We do want to increase this intensity multiplier though, and then maybe just we pull the horizon down so it's below. Okay, you know what? I'm going to do this after. I'm going to do the intensity after. Let's do the material first. And then we can see how much of a difference this is going to make to that shiny, glistening effect. So again, we're going to keep it really simple with the material. So we're going to throw this onto our landscape, which is our sea. And let's just remove these effects. Okay. So in our material, we're just going to remove the base color weight. And then we're going to remove the roughness, the reflection roughness. And then we just want to increase the transmission. So, and we can even make it create a little bit more of a blue effect in here. And we can see how this looks. So make it look a little bit more like the ocean. Okay, so we're getting a little bit closer. But again, we haven't really got that glistening or that shiny effect that the person was asking for. So back in here, let's increase the intensity of that light. And so we can now see we're getting a lot more intense light and we're getting more of this sort of hitting the surface of our ocean or of our waves. And then what we can do is in the reflection, at the moment we have no roughness at all, but strange enough, as you start to increase the roughness, we start to get that glistening effect. So as we sort of start to pull this up, we can see that we're now beginning to get those hot spots or that light shimmering on top of the surface of here. And then another thing that I did, which I just switched off really quickly because I forgot I'd left it on, is to add a little post effects. And so again, if you're working with post effects, we've already sort of talked about this on a lot of streams, that the traditional process would be exporting your AOVs and then doing all of these effects like glows in post or in compositing. But we can also have a look at how they look in here by just adding a bloom effect. And then we can just increase or decrease the threshold. And then we start to get that glistening or that glimmer over the top of the surface of our ocean. And so that is how I would do that. It is all really to do with your lighting and then also a little bit to do with your materials. So that's the way I did that. If anyone has any other suggestions though, feel free in the chat to let me know, because yeah, I'll be intrigued to know how other people would want to do this kind of setup. Okay, so finally, the next one I want to talk about is this. So, disclaimer, I have never worked in Octane, nor do I know much about the universal camera. But I do want to talk a little bit about bokeh and how we can create some interesting effects. And again, it is really using the bokeh image. That's how we can start to add some really interesting looks. So I'm just going to talk through how we can set that up. But again, I can't give you any advice similar to Octane, so I do apologize for that. So I just really quickly put this scene together, and this is based off of Dustin Valkema did a similar kind of quick tip, which looked great, and that's sort of where I got this information from. So shout out to Dustin. And so here we've just got a couple of coins from the asset browser that, of course, I threw the ZBrush logo on because it just looks really cool. And again, this is going to be down to the way that you set up things in regards to the real world. So the way that things like bokeh or depth of field work, or your camera settings work, is if you relate your scene similar to how you would relate it into the real world. So these are all normal real world scale. And then we just have our camera. And in here, I'm just going to increase the focal length. And this is going to help us create some shallow depth of field. So maybe we go to something like 100, and we can really focus on this center coin here. And how we can set up bokeh in Redshift is we can go into Optical. First, we're going to define our focus distance. So we can enter a value in here. We can click this little picker and choose something. Or what we can do is we can actually assign an object to be our focus object. So what I like to do is I like to take a null and I like to use the placement tools to place it on my focus area. And then I use that null inside of my Redshift camera. So if I just drop that inside of there. And the reason that I like this setup and that a lot of artists will use this setup is because now if I move my camera around, it's not going to lose that focus. It's still going to remain focusing on that null. Cool. So at the moment, we can see we don't have any depth of field going on. So there's a couple of things we need to do. We need to define the aperture, and also we need to enable bokeh. So if I just switch this on, it's going to take into consideration this aperture value. And so we can create a really shallow depth of field by reducing this aperture. And then I've already got this in here. So let me actually clear that just so we can see how it looks by default. Let's let that kick in. Okay, so we've got this really, really shallow depth of field. Maybe we'll pull it up a little bit more. So we've got this really nice sort of like creamy depth of field going on. But as you said, how do we make this look more unique? How do we make this look a little bit more customized? And this is where we can add a bokeh image, which is what the question was originally relating to. And so what we can do is, dependent on the style of bokeh that you're after, you can apply a different texture image. And so I have some of the GreyScale Gorilla textures here, and you can kind of see the different images, and these are going to give you a slightly unique and custom look. And so the ones that have these different colors are also going to create some chromatic aberration. So let's find something that's going to be a little bit intense. So maybe I'm going to go with this one here. So let's just pull that into that image section. And then no, we don't want to create a path. And now we can see we're getting some of that chromatic aberration, and we're getting a more unique type of bokeh, and it just looks a lot more interesting and a lot more sort of realistic for our scene. And so we can apply any of these textures in here just to change the look of that. So let's try and find a slightly different one. Let's go with one without, let's go with maybe what looks quite cool. Maybe something a little bit like this one here. And then we can drag and drop that in. And then go no. And then once that kicks in, we can again see that this is just creating a really nice effect. And so obviously we can see it without, which, as we can agree, doesn't look very interesting. And then with, just creates a really nice, interesting effect. So yeah, I'm unsure about the Octane Universal Camera. I haven't used that, I haven't done that. But when it comes to creating nice looking bokeh and Redshift, we still can just focus on those real world scale and settings for your camera. And then, of course, then enable that bokeh, play around with the aperture, and then you can always do the finishing touches by just applying a different image to there, just to add some unique effects. Cool. So I haven't been keeping an eye on the questions because I've been doing this.
I'm doing that.
Any?
Yeah.
Perfect.
We have a barrage of questions. Good.
I hope that's a positive.
It's always a positive, yes.
It is. Cool. Yeah. So hopefully to those of you who asked those questions, I hope they were good. If not, as always, as Thanasis says, you're more than welcome to DM or drop an email, and I can always share these project files too, because they were nice and easy to set up. Cool. So Thanasis, would you like to? Those are the ones I had. Some of the others were just like sort of answers. For example, someone was asking about, is there a way to get a post effects pass as a separate pass? And this is quite a recurring question. And the thing is, there isn't. So there isn't an AOV for post effects. And the reason behind that is if you're working in a compositing workflow and you're exporting your AOVs, chances are you will then be doing those types of effects in your compositing software with those tools. This is just sort of like, perhaps if you're getting an idea of how they look, as Thanasis has said before, and Lionel has said before, you perhaps wouldn't do your post effects in Redshift. You'd do it in your other software, unless you're just exporting and posting on social media.
For anyone that hasn't watched, we are doing the demystifying post-production every Monday. We've already done the first 2 weeks. And our master trainer, Lionel Visidomini, and very good friend, he touched upon these subjects. And basically, if you want the post effects pass, you need to do a beauty AOV and a proper render with all the effects on, and then use a difference effect in After Effects or Photoshop to extract those effects. But as Elly pointed out, if you're just doing look development, or you just want to post JPEGs or PNGs directly on one of your social channels, you can use the post effects. But if you want to do it properly, right, like that, properly, you have to do them in post. So you export your AOVs, whatever ones you require for reflections and speculars and so forth, and reproduce them, because they're two-dimensional effects anyway. Whether they're post effects in Redshift or in most renderers, they're just an effect on top. Talking about post effects, let's go to one of the questions about how we're going to do bloom and glare effects in, I'm changing to my screen, in physical render in R20. My question is, why are you on R20? But that's none of my business. Go to the render settings and set it to physical. And in case you didn't know, we have this effects tab here with all these post effects. One of them is called glow, and we have all sorts of other things. So you can use the glow, and it will use the parameters here insofar as the intensity that it will do the glow for, and so forth. So this is the equivalent we have. If you had a more modern version, you could even use the magic bullet looks. But we still suggest for any professional workflow to do these effects in post. So that was the question that was asked. So I'm going to go right to the top and see what we have as questions. How do we open a banana? Well, there are two methods. You can just grab it and pull it, but if sometimes it's not ripe, so you can cut it with a knife a bit, or you bite the top and you grab it. But I assume you mean in 3D. And my advice for something like this would be to model each, let's say, side, each, what would that be called, Elly? The each part of the peel, because a banana is what, 4 sides. Each part, model it separately, and use joints. That will be my suggestion. Do some sort of joint setup and wrap it. So that's the quick way. I do have some stuff to show. I'm going to go to the question from Atakan Kurchu, and the question is it possible to create UV mesh in Cinema 4D? And the follow-up question, because I didn't understand what that meant, would be a reverse UV mapping. So what I assume the question is about is we have this character here that has a UV mesh, right? You want a 3D mesh, but with this configuration. If that's the answer, the question, then the answer is simple. We have, if you go here and you look for UV in the nodes, we have a dedicated nodes modifier, UV to mesh. And when you apply it here, it will take your polygons and lay them out in the same configuration. So this would be the way to do it. And I guess you can even create morph targets from these two. And yeah, and you can morph between one and the other to flatten it. But if that's the question, this is your answer, this modifier. So that's gone. Now, Halal Studio is asking, Mesh modeling tools used to have symmetry settings, but not sure where it is now. Well, now it's part of the global symmetry up here where we have that little butterfly icon. And you turn this on, and this will take care of your symmetries. If you click on the cogwheel, it will bring up the settings, and you can pin it so it won't go away. If this is not on, it will go away when you click away. So pin it. And this applies to all the modeling tools and the sculpting brushes, even if you use them on proper sculpting. So this is the new Symmetry Hub that does planar and topological symmetry and radial symmetry. And it's the new tools you will find in the new Symmetry generator. That has all these things, how you can do the planar, how you can do the radial, and so forth. So the symmetry has been not only globalized in Cinema 4D, it's been extended to do many more things. So that would be your answer. So let's see. Before I read them, I'm just going to throw them up. Where it's better to connect the AO texture to overall tint or base color? My reply would be neither of those. For me, the best way to use the AO is, let me create a new material over here, is to use a layer, a material layer. Oops, not material layer, a color layer. See, layer, a color layer. And mix the AO in whatever way you want, with whatever colors for whatever channel. And then use it in the appropriate channel. So if you just want the AO without shading, you can get the AO and pipe it directly to the surface. Or, again, it depends what you're trying to do. But if you want to affect the color, I would suggest you work better with a ramp or a color layer, so you can adjust the parameters. So that will be the AO. Miracle workflows. Sarandona. Sounds like Maradona. Any miracle workflow to get rid of flickering and animated volume build meshes? We don't have miracle workflows, but generally, because whatever changes the point count of your meshes, and volume meshes are notorious for that, it's not their fault. That's how they work. And basically, the question is, if I have two spheres and I put them under a volume builder and a volume mesher, and I do this and turn on my lines, the notoriety of this is that when you move something, all these things flicker. And that's because there is no consistent topology here, right? So you cannot avoid this. That is totally unavoidable with volumes. Maybe you can reproject something onto this. I don't know if that's going to work. If you use some sort of method to get an extra sphere and make it bigger and then project it down. Overall, I would say that this is going to introduce other problems, but the short answer is unfortunately not. But depending on if you're trying to make something very specific, and let me give you an example. If you're trying to do motion blur with this, you can forget about it. It won't work because the point count changes. Therefore, the renderer does not know which point previously is the same point in the next frame. So you can see, look at these two positions and pay attention to this. The renderer doesn't know that part of the mesh where it exists later on, because the mapping of the mesh usually is done using the point positions. So unfortunately, no miracle solutions, but if there's a particular thing you're having problems with, simplify a scene, send it over. You can DM me at Noseman GR. And I just realized that there were 3 direct messages because my Twitter didn't tell me that I had some pending, and I just found them now. So I'm going to reply to anyone that has DM'd me. So yeah, that's the reply for this. Okay, let's keep going down. Glare shader, bloom effect, and physical render. We answered that. Can I paint normal direction on a mesh? I'd like to create you cannot paint normal direction. Having said that, I'd like to create fur with a matrix object. I'd like certain hairs to have a specific orientation. Well, there are certain workflows that have been presented in the past where you can groom an object using hair, and then you can generate splines from that hair, and then use those splines to create the directionality. But it's not a straightforward thing we could show right now. But painting normal direction, no, we don't have a way to do that, unfortunately. A question about MacBook Pro M3. I've got a Mac Pro circa 2010. What is M3? So
that is my exact machine that I'm currently using. So I would say yes, because it's what I do.
There you go. You got your answer. I'm about 14 years late. In April, it's going to be the 14th birthday of the Mac Pro I'm still using. Not for cinema body, though, because it doesn't support the old Xeon processors. Noseman is a legend. We know the answer to that. Thank you very much. Why are you laughing?
No, laughing in agreement.
Okay. This is another one. I don't think I need to work on this. So the question is, wondering about stained glass and shining a light through a texture to get colored light rays and wanting to get a pass, so an AOV, I would guess, that has alpha of just the volumetric light rays. Do you have a quick answer on this, Elly?
Not a quick one. I can try and have a play around and see if I can create something.
Yeah, and if we don't reply today, you can message either Elly or myself.
I'll make a note of that one. Yeah.
That will be an interesting one to show. Now, again, another one, Vinicius, Vinny. A lot of people are having difficulty with the ACEs, and we are trying to formulate a plan, because in at least 99% of the cases, as far as we see with our users, there shouldn't be a consideration. You just use a default settings and you just render your renders, and that's it. We need to find a way to message that, to explain that, and teach the amount of color management information that would be required by the majority of our users. And when you mention ACEs and PNG in the same phrase, that means that you probably don't need specific color management things. Just leave things and render. And if you like it, it's good. If you don't like it, tweak the lights and tweak the colors. So yeah, and we will get to that. We will make sure you watch Lionel's. He's done, and Lionel at Max does a lot of stuff for color as well. There is information here and there, but we're trying to find a path forwards to address this, to tell people with certainty that you do not need to be concerned about ACEs, because that covers a vast amount of users, because there's a lot of hype. It's a fantastic technology. It helps so much, but depending on the work you do, chances are you don't actually need it. You don't. When I say you don't need it, you don't need to be concerned with it. And then there's a level where, okay, you want to be concerned because you're going to do compositing, and you need to make sure that what you see in your final render is going to be the same thing you're going to see with your composite. That's exactly what Lionel has been showing the last 2 Mondays. So go catch up with those. And then if you are a professional that wants to do, you're doing stuff for a streaming channel or TV or something like that, then that's a different story. Then it's a very deep subject that you need to work in coordination with your partners. They're going to give you the guidelines and so forth. So none of these things, it's either extremely simple, forget about it, just work with the default settings as they come when you open up Cinema 4D, or you just need to watch Lionel's tutorials. But in order for us to create a more robust series, tutorial, or something like that, or a show dedicated, or even maybe a month of color to demystify all these things, that is something we are trying to formulate now, to disambiguate the complexity, the hype, because between what's actually what is color management actually about, and what the height of aces is between that. That's a massive gap. And a lot of the information is, for most cases, unnecessary for anyone to know. So we're just trying to simplify your lives here. Any additional comments, Elly?
No, I agree with everything that you said.
Thank you. Elly has to agree with me. Question: is it possible to create a puzzle mat using 2 separate material IDs on a text
Yes.
object? Right. Captain Bell, for instance, I would assume, as Elly says, yes, because a material ID is material. So
just do what you normally do. Apply your puzzle mat, leave it to material ID instead of object ID. Assign 1, 2, and 3, and then in your material, in the output node, then assign the material ID. And yes, it does work.
Boom. That's what I call.
Boom.
That's the answer. Okay. Let's see here. Advice for correcting wrong thickness in tubes made with a sweep when the angles of the rail objects are 90 degrees. The result usually looks like a real spline twists. Send me a file so I can take a look at that. The best way to stabilize splines is to use a rail spline. It's the only way to control the rotation when the source is a spline. Send me a file, and this can find its way in a quick tip. Lately, what I've been doing is any questions that could be put in a quick tip, I'm actually making quick tips out of that because I know that at least one person would be interested in watching it. And yep, please DM me at NosemanGR on Twixer. Let's see here. Atakan said that was the question. Good. Let's continue. I still have stuff to show, but the questions for the people that are here are quite important. The way to do material surface override in Redshift for all objects in a take, meaning it will override just the surface shading and keep all the displacement and bumps. I need to read this a few times and do some tests.
From what I understand, yes, you can, but you can only override like a color. So, for example, you'd have your objects with the displacement on as normal, and then hang on, if I just sort of like ping to my screen, let me just add that.
Yep.
So yeah, you can. So objects as normal. So let me just sort of get rid of that. This is like my object with my displacement on. I've got my new take with my render settings that I can then adjust. And then you can adjust the render settings. And in the system, under legacy, you have material override. And then you have the diffuse color. So that is, if you're looking to override to a material you've created, overall, I'd need to have a look. But if it's just a case of you wanting to maybe do a all over diffuse color or a bit of like a clay looking render with your displacement on, then yes, you can do a take, change the render settings for that particular take. And then in your material override, you can do that. And as you can see here, it keeps the displacement in the render view and it's just overridden the diffuse color. So that is possible if that's what you're hoping to do.
Boom. Fantastic.
Boom.
Okay. Hello, Studio. Redshift hair materials are not showing. Wait a minute. This is 2024.2. And you go here and you go materials and you see principled hair. Unless you're looking for something else, maybe you can go to the standard material and type in here hair, and you get the hair, the old hair material. That's the hair material. I don't. What was there another hair, Elly, which doesn't exist in there anymore?
Oh, I've not really worked a lot with hair.
DM me with
hair shader.
The hair shader is in there. The principled
okay.
hair, the principled hair. I think this is the one that has all the hair attributes, as far as I understand. I may be misunderstanding this. Okay, send me what you would expect to see, because because we use the current software all the time. I personally forget what was there in the past. I think that everything was the same way it is now. So apologize. Great question, Alexei. Thanks for the stream. How to achieve cartoon effect on Redshift materials? Watch last month's Demystifying Post-Production. That's number one. We did a few weeks with this particular topic. And then go to the Redshift forums and no comment. Elly, you shouldn't do that.
What? I told you I'm laughing in agreement. Okay, no, wait, do it again. We'll cut it out.
All right. And go to the Redshift forums. You can't.
I can't.
Okay.
I'm going to link to those tutorials as well from last month.
Excellent. Yeah, there were 4 weeks and we had quite a lot of stuff there. How do I reduce the excessive glitters caused by direct sunlight on a metal surface on my shader? What do you mean excessive? Is it, I would guess, the whites, the overexposed whites and all that? Reduce your specular or reduce your light intensity? It all depends on why these are appearing. Again, for these kind of very specific questions, make a very simple scene with a very simple object and the specific light you want, and send it over to me or Elly, and we can take a look at that particular thing, because it can be a number of things that are causing that. Can you edit normals on spline segments? No, we can't edit normals. There is no the normal of the spline. It's basically extracting the tangent of that particular position, and then you need to have one more axis to define in which direction. But we don't have. This is something that Houdini has, but it's still we can't. You can calculate it using nodes, but it's not a straightforward thing. We don't have a tool that does that. What you can do is use a rail spline in order to control if you're using that spline to do something specific. And that specific, why am I saying it when I can show it? So let's assume we have a circle here. And on this circle, we have a pyramid. And we have this pyramid to be aligned to splined. And tangential means that if the pyramid is set to Z, it will point forwards, all right? So you will see that it will always point forwards. Now, the question why you want to change the normal is so you can rotate this. That's why we have rail splines, wherever a spline is used for modeling or animation. Well, in this particular case, I can make a circle that's slightly bigger, use it in the rail spline, and then and this will pretty much show where the X, it's going to control where the X axis is pointing, which means if I take my rail spline and move the points around, the X axis is going to sort of move with it. So essentially, for the particular point where the pyramid is sitting on, we're changing its normal. Okay, so this is how we handle spline normal directions. If that, hopefully, it's helpful. But and it exists anywhere a spline is used for animation or modeling or deformation. Okay.
Also, I've thought of a quick answer to the excessive glitters or the kind of overexposed bright areas with direct sunlight on a metal surface.
You've got your screen.
So again, I'm just going to kind of like try and semi-recreate it. So let's say we've got a really intense light. And let's say you don't want to reduce the intensity because you're happy with how it's casting light in other parts of the scene. But again, you've got a metal material, so it's creating this kind of effect, which doesn't look very good. In the light itself, in the details tab, we actually have a contribution section. And these are the individual ray contributions. So you can see we have things like diffuse, so how it's affecting the diffuse, how it's affecting reflection, transmission, subsurface, etc. It's a lot of If you work with volumetric lighting, chances are you're going to be in here a lot adjusting this particular contribution setting. And so what we can do is we could just drop down of this particular light, which is casting this overexposure on our reflection, and we can just pull down the reflection contribution. And we can now see that we're sort of able to prevent that from happening. So hopefully that helps.
That is wonderful. If it doesn't answer your question, please send a very simplified scene, remove anything that's not necessary to exhibit the problem, and we will get to you shortly. You're fifth in line, as they say in automatic. Estimated wait time, 65 years. So we have a question about particle emitter. I'm going to show something with particles today. Holy, it's 1:45. We need to go through this quite quickly. So I'm going to a technique to use ZRemesher keeping topology direction. For example, a curved road, sidewalks, and islands in between. The ZRemesher has in ZBrush. I don't know ZBrush. I think I know how to install it, and that's as far as my knowledge goes. But if you go to the Cinema 4D remesher, I don't know if it's going to work, but you can test it. If you go to the remesh, there's this flow splines, and you can use splines to guide how the topology is going to be made. If that doesn't solve your problem, send me the mesh, and I can take a look. So let's do this. Question. I have a few shots of just a product. What would be the best workflow? Using Xref to reference the object into the shots, or just using the asset browser to import? It depends what you want to do. Are they all under the same lighting and you want to create a series of shots? There are many ways to do that. You can use the render queue, just save different files. Xrefs are good for certain things, but they have some, let's say, if you're not careful with them, you can lose, your scene, or make things not work properly or something like that. I do not use Xrefs. A lot of people use them very successfully, but I have no experience about that. Again, if you can be a bit more specific of why, a few shots of just the product, why don't you just render each scene separately? If there's a particularity in the reason you're asking this question, let me know, and there could be a workflow that can find its way in a quick tip. And we pay no royalties for questions asked for quick tips. What is this? How to make a Redshift render as fast as standard render for Puzzlemattes? Elly, do you have an answer for that? As fast as standard?
Well, it's saying it's taking 1 to 2 seconds. I would consider that pretty fast.
But how I
Still?
use quality? Yeah, but
I would
that's
say for 1 frame, 1 to 2 is okay. No? No?
the thing is that I know, we all know that standard render things like alpha channels and stuff like that, it was blazingly fast, but it was a totally different technology, right? It was scanline renderer. Redshift is a ray tracer. So even the simple effects, if you make a blank background, just take a dome light and render it, it's not going to render as fast as a standard. That is a trade-off. So if you play with the settings, remove GI and all that kind of stuff, and it still goes slow, I don't think there's any way to make it. Because I remember standard render was pretty much instantaneous in certain things. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's hard to get the sort of 1 second frames. But that being said, I can do a bit of like a shameless plug. The last Thursday of this month, I am doing a how to optimize your render settings in Redshift. And we're going to be looking at some more advanced sort of settings. So in particular, looking at manual sampling and how we can optimize that by looking at the min and max and the error threshold, which has a big part to play. And then we're going to look at things like trace depths, and we're going to work on a particular scene, and we're going to look at a sort of a quality versus speed, and we're going to try and match the high quality with the low quality speed. That's my goal. So that could be a good one for that person.
Anyone that's a setting geek can go and check out a quite old but very relevant tutorial by Saul Espinosa. Just search on YouTube for Art of Saul, SAUL, one word, Art of Saul. And he made this extensive 1 hour tutorial that talks about the overrides and stuff like that. It's very techy. It has some math in and all that. But if you're into that kind of stuff, I suggest you go and watch it to prepare. Next question. Does displacement material change the object by segment? Because when I send me a scene, a very simple scene with what you've done, because to make sure that we answer it. Let's see, we're going down a bit because we're coming to the end of the current questions. Let's see. Is it possible to create an in-depth series about scene nodes and all that? We have currently stuff that is more relevant. I know that a lot of people are asking for nodes and stuff like that. But as far as workflow tools, if you don't know MoGraph from end to end, there's no reason. There are very little reasons for you to get into that right now. So I think for the training team, it's better to put our time into making relevant tutorials, especially since the interface changed. We haven't got an in-depth tutorial series for MoGraph and all that. I've promised I'm going to make it, but don't tell anyone. I'm just saying it to you, because you're part of the inner circle.
Just saying it live to be forever living on YouTube.
Yeah,
we'll cut that as a quick tip and just post it.
Okay, so any update news? Right, I'm putting this up. I love updates and news for 2023.3 or 2025. I have a reply to that.
Nope. No news.
We can't confirm or deny. The only thing we can say is that our developers are on fire. There's that. That's acceptable, right? Didn't breach any NDA.
No.
Okay. So we had some questions. So we had some questions. Let's start with the simple one here. So there was a question that was asked to Elly about using the new rigid body dynamic system. Excellent. Rigid body objects, self collisions, I can't make it work, still overlapping and so forth. There's one detail why that happens. And the detail is, and let me just turn this off. So let's assume we have this setup here, and we have this cloner, we have a rigid body dynamic object on it, and no gravity. I've went to my settings, scene, and removed gravity. So if I press play now, we're going to get this thing, right? We don't want this thing. We want these to be pretty close to each other. So I'm going to go to my rigid body dynamic in the forces, and this is the new RBD, and just put follow position and rotation to 1, and this would try and keep them together, right? So this on its own, and I haven't even got the push apart working, it works. The collision avoidance, the initial collision avoidance is always there. Now I've got this as a collider, I'm animated it, so everything is fine. Now, if you want to make sure if the problems with your collisions, for example, let's say you just didn't want these to have follow position, follow rotation, right? And you get this sort of problem here. How do you stop them? Well, the simplest solution is to use a push apart effector. And the push apart, if I have a sphere that's 10 centimeters, the push apart needs to be, first of all, I have a random effector that randomizes the scales, right? So I've created these spheres. These spheres are they're intentionally overlapping. So here I've made the size smaller. I want them to be overlapping. And because the sphere has a radius of 10, I'm using a push apart with a value of 11 just to push them a bit more. And I'm playing with the iterations. But before that, I'm randomizing these. The good thing is that if you apply the push apart after whatever size scale effector you've applied to your cloner, in this case, the random effector, what it will do, it will take into account the difference in scale. And the push apart, if I set this to the default setting, we will get some overlaps here. You can see that they're still blowing because there's so many objects stacked in here where 10 iterations will not avoid these kind of collisions. So the way to eyeball this, eyeballing is a powerful tool. You just increase until it stops jittering. See those inner spheres here. So when these start jittering, at some point you can't see any meaningful movement, right? You can see some movement here. The minute these sort of stabilize, that's where you are. So nothing is touching now. If I press play, you'll see that we're not going to get that explosion. There you go. That's the sphere pushing them out. It's not, and we have this perfect avoidance and nothing is going anywhere. But if you want to retain their positions and maybe add some turbulence, go and add a small amount of follow position, follow rotation to sort of spring them back into their original, the original position they had. And you can create some interesting effects. The more you increase this, you can animate it, you can make these fly out, come in. But anyway, I digress. But the push apart using the little settings I showed you would be the ideal way to avoid the initial collision. And even if you don't have the follow position, follow rotation, they will just stay where they are. Right. Oh, I've got the turbulence. That's why it's blowing everything away. And there you go. Stable. These are free floating and they're stable because there is no initial contact. And hopefully that answered the question. Now, the second question, another question we had was about those particles. And I did a little post. And the question was how to keep particles with noise inside a sphere, something like that. And this is a new particle technology we've had for the last 25 years, because I'm nearly 60, so anything that was done 25 years ago is very young in my view. This is just a standard emitter. The trick is how to set up, and this is it, 1, 2, 3, 4 objects to create this. And in this setup, I've got 4 emitters, and I'm doing this, and there's so many permutations you can do with this and create some astonishing effects. So let's just set it up. I mean, why not? That's what we're here for. So let's create a standard emitter. That's it. Just a standard particle emitter. It's 20 odd years old or something like that. Let's set this to 1000. And of course, always turn them up in tandem. The birth rate for the renderer, the system is so old, back then it will make a huge difference in the calculation. So that's why now you can generate tens of thousands of particles without a problem. Now, what we want to do here is create some sort of noise that is contained within a sphere. And the tool we use for this is, first of all, we use a volume builder. And we're going to confine this because the volume builder has the vector mode. It was added a couple of years back. And we need some sort of shape to generate this volume builder. Excuse me. So now we have this typical, the vectors are pointing away from the normals. I'm going to do a few changes to this. Number one, I'm going to reduce the voxels. I don't have to, but I will, because this looks more fuzzier. I'm going to select the sphere, and there's an important thing that has to do with generating vector volumes, and it's how it's generating it. It either first converts it into a signed distance field, or it first, or a distance field, which is the SDF without the positive and negative. Go on the old University and watch my tutorials on volumes. I explain all this. Or a fog. Now, why would you want it to be fog? And that's because the signed distance field will create a value based on the distance, and depending on how many interior and exterior voxels you have, inside it's going to be empty. So in here now, we don't have any of those. Look at that. We're in this little sphere made out of little lines. But inside, there's nothing. You can always extend the interior voxel size, right? And you can fill it in. But there's a better solution. You go to the fog, and you make sure you have maximum voxel fall off, right? Maximum voxel fall off. And this will fill it with the values. So now we have this sphere, which is filled with these little vectors that are pointing away from the surface of our sphere. Now, this is not very useful at this particular moment, unless you're trying to do something like send all the particles in a radial direction. So let me add the component that will allow us in the forces to use these vectors. And I'm going to use the field force. And in the field force, you can drag the volume and reference it not as a point object, but as a volume object. And let's make this and this invisible and see what happens in this particular case. And the answer is nothing very interesting. The values are very small and so forth. So there are certain things we need to do. Number one, the best way to control it and take notes of these things is to set absolute velocity. Now, the differences between add velocity, set absolute velocity, and change direction is that velocity is a dual component thing. It's a little vector that shows you in which direction you're going. And there is a speed component to it if you're going in one direction slowly or really fast. And that will be the vector magnitude, how big that arrow is. And when you add to velocity, what it does, it takes whatever velocity the particle had, it was going in a certain direction at a certain speed, and each frame it adds the little arrow, whatever this arrow is, it just adds it and then adds it again. So it modifies the direction a bit. Now, if you set this to absolute, change direction, keeps the velocity, so the magnitude, how fast it's going, it just changes the direction it's going. But if you set this to absolute velocity, then the field force controls 100% which way they're going and how fast they're going. And in my view, that is the best way. And the strength sort of controls that sort of speed. Now, you can see that we're getting this very weird thing going on. And a lot of people give up right here. Don't give up. Let's do a few changes. Number one, select your volume builder, go to the layer and set it to linear. This is going to create a more smooth transition from vector to vector, right? From one arrow to the other, the gap in between here, because there is a value in between how these transition. The best way is to do that with linear or using quadratic. So quadratic is a bit more smooth, but linear will do. Now, the next thing you need to do is make sure you go to the remapping. And of course, if I increase this, let's say 50, it appears that something is going to happen. Nothing really happens. You need to go to the remapping, enable it, and you will have this new tab called direction. And here it says no remap. Set this to normalize. Now something's happening. Now, what normalize is going to do is it's only going to extract the direction where that little vector, this little arrow is going. And as far as the speed, that's going to be now controlled by the strength. That's it. So a small strength, they go slow. Large strength, they go fast. Okay, now you can see that they're all being just sucked in, and we see these weird flickering things, which totally trick people. Like, what's going on? It looks like a mistake. Well, it's not. If you go to the emitter, you will see that the emitter is already emitting at a certain speed. Now, if I do this, look at that. So what's happening is that at the frame where the particle is being emitted, it's going to have that initial speed, and then suddenly the field force is going to take over. If you just want the field force to control the full motion, just set the speed to 0. So now we have this portal. So you can make this really nice effect. And you can do all sorts of things now. You can reverse the direction. So now everything's going in. You can animate it as well and do this, right? So now we're getting somewhere. Okay, we're getting somewhere. It's sending these in certain directions. And if you move your emitter, you will see that it's pushing them away from the center, because that's where those little arrows are pointing, right? Look at how they follow those arrows. Now, that's not good enough, though, because we want to do these cool things. The minute that the particle reaches the edge of these points, they will stop, because we've set the field force to use absolute velocity. That means that when the vectors stop, the velocity stops. But we don't care in this particular case, because we want to confine the particles inside our sphere. But they're going in the wrong direction. We want them to go around and swirl around and so forth. To do that, you need to randomize these initial positions of your arrows. These are too uniform. We want to randomize them in different directions. And number two, we want to turn them so they're not pointing away, because these show the direction of the arrow. which has 3 axes, right? But the directionality is this. We want to turn them on their side so they sort of go around and around the sphere or the circle. And number one, you need to go and create a random field. Drag it in here. Let's do a few adjustments. By definition, you drop a field here, it creates a box with these dimensions and applies that randomness to that box. We want to apply it to whatever is underneath. So now we have these random directions, but I don't want them to just apply, because if I turn this off, it shouldn't make a difference, because now this is overriding this. You need to use this special mathematical construct, which does some sort of mathematical thingy between two vectors, which is called cross. By definition, the cross will turn them to the side. Let's say it that way. Mathematicians and scientists alike are now, the dead ones are rolling in their graves, the alive ones are throwing things at their televisions. But in any case, just make a random field and set it to cross, and everything now is going to be nice and swirly. Oh my God. Imagine a scientist hearing me saying, and everything is going to be nice and swirly. And look at that. Look at what we have now. So we have the beginnings of something very interesting. Extend your timeline. Let's go to the emitter and do some adjustments. I want the emission to stop at 600. I want it to emit constantly. There's a huge lifetime here. I'm good with that. And you're seeing now that we're getting these very, very, very interesting patterns here. Okay. And everything is contained inside, because everything, these vectors are everywhere inside here. Let's change a few things that make things nicer. I'm going to set this to be 400. So I'm growing this noise. And immediately you saw, you can animate this. You can go, oh, let's make small swirls, squirrels. And look at that. You can start playing with this and create amazing animation. So I'm going to set it to 400. And let's set the animation speed to 25 so it swirls around. Okay, so we have this now, which pretty much satisfies the question: how do we keep the particles in a noise and inside our sphere and whatnot? But let me take it a step further. I want you to pay attention. If I take this and I make it small and rewind, and I'm going to move this in various directions, what's happening with that noise is that it's sort of, because it twists the arrows, that cross thing we did, right? That thing that lays them on the back, that's going to be the reason why I'm not going to get a honorable doctorate from any university in math or physics. But essentially what it does is, wherever I place my emitter, the particles are going to swirl around in a sort of spherical thing, and they won't go inside, right? Look at that. And that's because these vectors are pointing wherever you are in the sphere in a tangential direction. All of them, whether they're going left or right, it's always in a tangential direction. So everything is swirling on that thin little plane you see. So what can I do with this? And the answer is magic. Let's get the emitter. Let's go to the basic and change the color, automatic, and let's make this orange. Let's take a second emitter, name it 2, and make it green. And now move this down and move it over. Then make a third emitter and move it somewhere else, further down and further inside. So what we're creating here is a multi-layered system. And this is all you need. Just follow the instructions I gave you earlier, and this is all you need. And you can create 10 emitters, 20 emitters. Each one can be referenced by a different cloner, have different objects, have different colors, render them using Redshift and so forth. And you can take this. This is what always makes me fall in love again with Cinema 4D. We have one to create my vector volumes and a way to apply those. That's all we have, 4 objects. And that's our setup here. If you want to make it more intricate, you can create a different one and make sure that the emitter only references in the include the specific field force. So you can have 3 or 4 volume builders with different noises, different sizes, different shapes, different field forces with different speeds. And just by replicating this 3 or 4 times, you tell your client that you worked 3 weeks on this and it only took you 30 seconds, and you can make a lot of money. So I don't know. Yeah. And I was sitting before I got on the show, I was just sitting looking at this and just moving the emitters around. Oh, you can animate them as well. I mean, that's what we can do with 25-year-old 20 technology, right? That's how we roll. That's how we roll. Okay. Let's go to, so we did the avoid collisions. We did the particle, and these are just, this I posted on Twitter is just the same thing. I added an attractor, which I'm animating. So at frame 200, it's going to suck the particles in, and then it's going to deactivate, and they're going to go out. So give it a few seconds. I've got motion blur. Why don't I have motion blur here? Do I have motion blur? No, depth of field, and I've got a lot of particles. But in any case, now it's going to start sucking them in because they're, come on, attractor. Oh, it's at frame 300. So asking questions. Only the title is Ask Me Anything. That's funny. Okay, now it's going to start sucking them in. There you go. Going in. And yeah, it seems that they're being sucked inside, and and it's just activating the attractor and deactivating the attractor. That's how simple it gets. So you can use any number of permutations for this setup and create all sorts of great stuff. I made this. If you make your emitters smaller, it will create these strips. If you make your emitters larger, it will create these things. And oh, look at that. That's interesting. Anyhow, you can use the same thing with thinking particles. If you want to emit from an object, instead of using an emitter here, so I'm not going to use the emitter. So this is what I did here. So let's assume you want to emit from an object. You will do that using thinking particles or a matrix that generates thinking particles. So I can just go here, create a null. Let's create an object, a disk, for example. I want to emit from this disk, make it editable, unfortunately. Go here, add a very quick espresso. We don't have much espresso. It's very simple. Go here and type matter for matter waves. Excellent. And the other thing is force, p-force object. Link these up. If you need more forces, create more and just link them up. Drag your field force in here and tell the p matter waves to use the disk object as the emitter. Let's increase this to, I don't know, 2300, and this should work as the previous one. We have that initial velocity thing going on. That's why. But this is how this would work as well if you want to create particles of that come from an object. So that was some sort of question. Let me go here. Now, we did have a question about AOVs and volumes, and I've got this little smoke puff that is being rendered, and I don't know if that replies to the answer. Sorry, to the question. It replies to the answer. I'm totally losing it. A Redshift AOV manager, which you can always go here and get the AOV manager. I like to go with 3 clicks, and you create the volume lighting and the volume fog tint. Make sure buckets are on, and volume lighting is going to give you the general lighting of it. And if I've created the light groups, and Lionel touches upon that. I don't know if it's very much visible here, but we can see the contribution of one light and the contribution of the other light. So you can take it's very, very dark here. Maybe I should go here and increase the intensity, and you will see it better. There you go. That's the contribution of one of the lights, and there's the other one as well. So that's how you would go and extract them. And as far as I remember, the volume, not the lighting, but the tint is basically the alpha channel, I would assume. If I'm wrong, either edit it out or someone correct me. So that will be the volume question. The last thing I'm going to touch upon very quickly. Oh my God, it's the cutoff time. I lost track of time. This is from my friend Jean Erduman. I'm going to reply to him. Basically, the question was about controlling subsurface scattering on characters and objects. And what I did here, I don't know, maybe this can become a tutorial. I used body paint. I apologize. And I basically painted a map that had the nose and the ear, and I just piped it in somewhere. Here we have the skin. This is my mat. So I can edit the image. It's going to open somewhere on some software that, yeah, Photoshop. It's just a black and white matte where the UVs are. I just used body paint because it was a very simple way to paint it. This is a nose. These are the ears. These are the nostrils. And this is just some sort of bleed went to the other side. And it defines the scale. If I take, you can see the texture here is the weighting of my subsurface scattering. So close this and close this. If you go subsurface, the weighting. And then you can use the scale and the color to dictate what's going on. That's why you see subsurface scattering only on the surfaces that don't have bone, right? Because bone doesn't allow light to go through. Usually it's a nose. The bigger the nose, the more SSS. I know that. And the ears, I also know that. And you can just isolate these areas and go and paint in Photoshop or body paint or whatever your favorite 3D painting software is. Just a black and white map to indicate where you want more subsurface scattering and so forth. I'll talk to you, Jean, which I don't know if you're even present. You made me do this and you didn't even come to see me present. I think I'm done for my stuff. Shall we? Right, let's check a few more questions.
Yes, there are a couple more that I've been sort of like starring. A few I've answered in the chat as well.
Excellent. In the chat, which ones? Oh, you answered them. So question, what if we want to emit on the object? Like, emitter is away from the object and there. Yeah, you can use not with the standard. The standard emitter doesn't do that kind of stuff. You would go the thinking particles route and use what I showed with the P matter waves, generate the particles, and they just swirl around. Your force, the field force setup I used applies to all our particle systems. It applies to hair. It applies to dynamics. It applies to simulations. It applies to everything that uses forces. And that's one of the great things about this. Okay. And right, a couple that I haven't seen answered. I have an object inside a cloner. I'm trying to have a spherical field move across these objects. And I want it to change color to red when the field is affecting it. You need to watch tutorials. It's
I have that up as a quick scene. If
quickly.
I can like really just quickly show that.
I'm adding you to the stage.
From what I gather, this is kind of like the idea, right? So really simple cloner setup, and the spherical field is controlling the color. So all I've got is, I mean, a plane effector doing nothing, but you could have it doing whatever you wanted it to do. Inside the fields, I've got a spherical field, which is going to be controlling the color change. And then in the material, I have my color user data node. So this is how you can access that MoGraph color. And also earlier, someone asked a question on how you can get different colors for your clones. Same kind of thing. All you would need is geometry ID color instead. Whereas this, what we're going with is we're going with MoGraph color. And so it's going to be looking at the color that we've set up in our MoGraph effectors. And then we can recolor it or colorize it with a ramp, which is what I did here to get my red and my blue. And then now as I move my field around, changes the color.
And Francis, contact me, DM me on Twitter at NosemanGR and set up your simple scene or ask me and I may send you what Elly is doing now. Now, if you want them to turn on like that, because there's sometimes I don't want them to fade in or fade out, you just change the fall off of the sphere. But in any case, I can send you a file, so contact me. Change material. Then you make it black and white, and you use a material switch in Redshift using the MoGraph color as the selector.
Yeah.
Elly's showing
so
it.
Material Blender. Let me just. How quickly can I work with nodes?
Yeah, Blender will be one, and I think there's the switch as well.
Oh, so as in like the shader switch?
It works as shader switch, I think. That's another way of doing it. You can show it this way. It doesn't make a difference.
Yes, true. We could do shader switch.
So
Let me
what
just
Elly is
create
showing,
a second material.
I'm doing the narration. What Elly is showing is the material blender, which
This is
uses.
where I can't multitask, as you can tell.
What are you talking about? You're the best multitasker I know. And Elly is creating two standard materials and using the material blender that you can use a value to blend from one material to the other, just like with layer color. And the MoGraph color will export a blending value. So when it's white, it will show one material. When it's black, it's going to show the other. And when there's a blend between them, you can see the two materials overlap. You can always use a ramp in between to change the sampling if you want it to change from one to the other immediately. And you just make it linear. Is that helping, Elly?
No, it is. I'm liking the voice as well. It's even better than normal.
Okay, Demis is happy now. Material blender is the keyword. You've answered successfully, but go ahead.
And this is the other one that you were talking about, the shader switch, where yeah, you can then put it into the shader selector. But I think you'd have to convert it to
there is
data.
yeah, you need to do
Yeah.
a change range as
Yeah.
well, because you need to take black and white is 0 to 1. So what if you have 3 clones and three colors or 4 colors? That's harder to do. So you need to take your 0 to 1 and remap it to 0 to 3 for 4 or 0 to 5 for 6. 0 counts as a number, and then you can do the same thing using the select as a switch. What's it called again? Switch. Oh my god.
Shader switch?
Yeah, shader switch. Yeah.
Shader switch. Say that quickly 3 times. Also, Demi's art saying it must be weird for me to have a narrator. No, actually, I really enjoyed that. Maybe you can come on to the rest of my streams. I could just sit and do it, and then you can narrate over the top. I think that'd be nice.
And we can do a certain thing. I'm not going to be looking at your screen, so I'm going to make random narration on other stuff. That would be totally fun for everyone.
To be fair, that's sort of what we were just doing. You were talking about the shader switch and the change range, and I was just sort of like slowly putting it together.
Okay, we're done. We're done. Remove the screens. Put the faces on. Let's put the faces on. Am I going to do it or? All right. Okay. So first of all, if you enjoy this show, tell people. Right. We feel very happy when more people watch us. Right. So spread the word that you enjoy these shows. Ask your questions. So engage. I love the amount of engagement that we have, but we can up it. We can up the tempo a bit. I want to thank every one of you for being part of our show. Ask your questions. You can contact Elly on Instagram.
At it was Elly.
It was Elly. It still is.
It was. It still is Elly.
And at Noseman GR, one word, Noseman the Greek. On Twixer, you can DM me. And I think we are good. We only overrun by 24.5 minutes. So everything's on schedule. So see you on Monday for the 3rd installment of Demystifying Post-Production AOVs and all that. We're going to be showing, is that Fusion?
I should probably know, shouldn't I?
I should probably know.
Is it Fusion? If you might give me 1 second, I can have a quick look.
It's going to be interesting.
They are always interesting. Okay, yes, Cinema 4D to Fusion compositing workflow with Thomas from Sensu.
Yeah, so if anyone has any questions about Fusion and stuff like that, come and join us. And because people are complaining that we don't, show too much Fusion. Well, there you go. We're going to show it. Excellent.
Your prayers have been answered.
Exactly. We are miracle makers. Well, again, thank you everyone for coming. Elly, as usual, and it's always the thing where I look this way to see my monitor and see you, when in fact, you're right there. So, Elly, it was great seeing you again.
It was great seeing you too.
Have a nice afternoon, and goodbye, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.